The evacuation sirens had been wailing for 3 days straight. Commander Sarah Chen pressed her face against the reinforced glass of the observation deck, watching the last civilian transport ships disappear into the star-speckled void. Behind them, the Zephyrian fleet hung like a constellation of death, their bioships pulsing with an alien luminescence that made her stomach turn. "Ma'am, that's the last of them," Lieutenant Rodriguez reported, his voice barely audible over the klaxons. "All civilian populations have been evacuated from the outer colonies. We're down to just the military installations." Sarah nodded, though her heart felt like lead. Kepler 442b had been humanity's crown jewel, a terraformed paradise that had taken 3 generations to build. The sprawling cities with their crystal spires, the vast agricultural zones that fed half the outer rim, the research facilities that had pushed human knowledge to its very limits, all of it would be ash within hours. The Zephyrians didn't take prisoners. They didn't negotiate. They consumed. She turned away from the window and walked through the corridors of Fort Meridian, humanity's last major stronghold on the planet. The walls vibrated with each impact from the orbital bombardment above. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, and the faces of the soldiers they passed told the same story. They all knew they were going to die here. In the command center, Admiral Marcus Webb stood hunched over the tactical display, his weathered face grim. A holographic projection showed the battle unfolding in real time. Earth's Third Fleet was putting up a valiant fight, but they were outnumbered 5-1. The massive Zephyrian bioships released clouds of smaller attack craft like spores from some cosmic fungus. "Status report, Admiral," Sarah said as she approached. Webb didn't look up. "We've lost the orbital defense platforms. The Missouri and the Yorktown are gone. Captain Harrison's holding the line with what's left of the destroyer squadron, but..." He paused, watching as another human ship winked out of existence on the display. "They won't last another hour." The ground beneath their feet shuddered violently. Dust rained from the ceiling as somewhere above them, a Zephyrian plasma beam carved through the mountain that housed their base. "Sir, incoming transmission from the Edinburgh," Communications Officer Thompson called out. "Captain Harrison wants to speak with you." The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the destroyer Edinburgh. Captain Harrison's uniform was torn and bloodied, and sparks flew from damaged consoles behind him. "Admiral, we can't hold them much longer. I'm reading massive bioship formations moving into bombardment position. You need to evacuate the surface installations now." "Negative, Captain," Webb replied firmly. "We hold this position. If we can delay them even a few more hours, it might give the outer colonies time to..." "Sir, with respect, there are no more outer colonies to save," Harrison interrupted. "Long-range sensors show Zephyrian fleets hitting Titan Station, New Geneva, even the Mars orbital facilities. This isn't just an attack on Kepler 442b. This is a coordinated assault on every major human settlement." The words hit the command center like a physical blow. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Mars? That was only 8 light-years from Earth itself. Are you telling me this is it?" Sarah heard herself ask. "This is how humanity ends?" Harrison's expression was grim. "I'm telling you that if there's going to be any hope for our species, it's not going to come from holding this rock. My recommendation is immediate evacuation to the inner systems. Regroup, warn Earth, prepare for..." The transmission cut to static as another ship died in the void above them. Sarah looked around the command center. These people, her people, had trained their entire lives for this moment. Not to win, because everyone knew that was impossible against the Zephyrian swarm. But to buy time. To make the aliens pay for every meter of human space. "Admiral," she said quietly, "what are your orders?" Webb was silent for a long moment, staring at the tactical display where red enemy markers vastly outnumbered the few remaining blue dots. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady despite everything. "We hold. Every minute we keep them here is another minute for the evacuation fleets to reach safety. Every Zephyrian ship we destroy is one less that attacks Earth." A new alarm began blaring, the proximity alert. The bioships had broken through the orbital defenses and were beginning their descent toward the surface. Through the reinforced walls of the command center, Sarah could hear a new sound, a low, thrumming vibration that seemed to come from the very air itself.
Bioship atmospheric entry confirmed, Thompson reported. Multiple contacts, bearing down on our position.
Sarah closed her eyes and thought of her daughter, safe aboard one of the evacuation ships now racing toward Earth. At least Emily would live. At least some part of humanity would survive to remember what they had built here. The lights flickered and went out, replaced by the red glow of emergency power. The thrumming sound grew louder, and, through the observation windows, they could see shapes moving in the clouded sky above, massive, organic forms that defied every principle of aerodynamics humanity understood. All stations, prepare for ground assault, Admiral Webb commanded.
Make them remember they fought humans here.
Sarah checked her sidearm and moved toward her post. Around her, the men and women of Fort Meridian prepared for their final battle. Outside, the sky burned with alien fire, and the very air seemed to scream with the sound of approaching death. But they would not go quietly. They were human, and humans had always been at their best when the odds were impossible. The first bioship touched down with a sound like thunder, its organic hull splitting open to disgorge hordes of Zephyrian warriors. The final battle for Kepler 442b had begun. And, high above, beyond the atmosphere, something vast and ancient stirred in the depths of space, drawn by the psychic screams of a dying world and the desperate courage of those who refused to surrender. The Zephyrian ground assault began at dawn, though the alien bioships had blocked out so much sunlight that dawn was barely a suggestion of gray through the smoke and ash.
Sarah Chen crouched behind the reinforced barricades of Fort Meridian's outer perimeter, her plasma rifle humming with deadly energy.
The first wave came like a living tide. Zephyrian warriors were nightmares given form, tall, skeletal beings wrapped in chitinous armor that seemed to grow from their very skin. They moved with an unsettling grace, their elongated limbs carrying them across the broken landscape faster than anything that size should move. Behind them came larger forms, tank-sized creatures with multiple heads and weapon limbs that spat corrosive bioplasma.
Contact front. Sergeant Williams shouted from the next position over.
His heavy plasma cannon opened up, carving bright lines through the advancing horde. Where the beam struck, Zephyrian warriors simply dissolved, but, for everyone that fell, two more seemed to take its place.
Sarah aimed carefully and fired.
Her shot took the head off a charging warrior, but its body kept moving for several more steps before finally collapsing.
These things didn't die easily.
The battle raged for hours. The human defenders fought with everything they had, using every advantage their technology could provide. Automated turrets rose from concealed positions, pouring fire into the alien ranks.
Hover tanks emerged from underground bunkers, their fusion cannons lighting up the battlefield.
For a brief moment, Sarah dared to hope they might actually hold. Then, the bioships began to sing. It started as a low harmonic that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound bypassed the ears entirely, resonating directly in their bones, their blood, their very DNA.
Several defenders collapsed immediately, clutching their heads and screaming.
Others began to turn their weapons on their own comrades, their eyes vacant and staring. Sarah felt the psychic assault like ice water in her veins. The song tried to reach into her mind, to turn her into a puppet like the others. Only her neural implants, military-grade protection against enemy psionics, kept her conscious and aware.
Neural shielding, now. Admiral Webb's voice crackled over the comm system. All units activate neural shielding.
Those who had the implants survived. The others? Sarah tried not to look at what remained of Sergeant Williams after he turned his plasma cannon on himself.
The tide of battle turned quickly after that.
With half their defenders either dead or compromised, the outer perimeter fell within minutes. Sarah and the surviving soldiers fell back to the inner fortress, sealing blast doors behind them as Zephyrian warriors poured through the breaches. In the command center, the situation was deteriorating rapidly.
Admiral Webb stood before the main tactical display, which now showed red enemy markers throughout the facility. "Sir, they've breached sectors 7 through 12, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported. We've lost contact with engineering and the armory." "How long until they reach the command center?" Webb asked.
15 minutes, maybe 20 if the blast doors hold. Sarah slumped against a wall, exhaustion and despair weighing her down like lead. Around her, the surviving officers and technicians prepared for their last stand. Some checked their weapons, others destroyed sensitive data, and a few simply sat in quiet contemplation of their approaching death. Admiral, Communications Officer Thompson called out suddenly. "I'm picking up something strange on the long-range sensors."
Webb moved to Thompson's station. "What kind of strange?"
Well, sir, it's big.
Really big.
And it's moving toward us at incredible speed." Sarah forced herself to stand and look at the sensor display. There, at the very edge of their detection range, was a contact unlike anything she'd ever seen. It was massive, larger than any ship in the human fleet, larger even than the biggest Zephyrian bioships.
Could it be reinforcements? Rodriguez asked hopefully. Thompson shook his head. "No, sir. The energy signature is. I've never seen anything like it. It's not human technology, but it's not Zephyrian either."
A new sound echoed through the facility, the screech of metal being torn apart. The Zephyrians had broken through another blast door.
They were getting closer.
"Ma'am," Thompson continued, his voice rising with excitement, "whatever that thing is, it's accelerating.
Current trajectory puts it in this system in approximately 6 hours.
We don't have 6 hours, Sarah said quietly. As if to emphasize her point, an explosion rocked the command center. Emergency lighting failed in several sections, and the air filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burning electronics.
"Sir, they've reached the inner corridors," Rodriguez reported. "I recommend we activate the self-destruct. At least we can take some of them with us." Admiral Webb was quiet for a long moment, staring at the approaching contact on the sensor display. Finally, he shook his head. "Not yet.
Something's coming, and I want to know what it is before the blast door to the command center exploded inward." Zephyrian warriors poured through the breach, their weapons already charging. The remaining human defenders opened fire, and the command center became a war zone.
Sarah dove behind a console as bioplasma bolts sizzled overhead. She could hear Admiral Webb shouting orders, could hear her comrades dying one by one.
Through the chaos, she caught glimpses of the advancing aliens, tall figures in organic armor, their movements fluid and deadly. One of the warriors spotted her hiding place and raised its weapon.
Sarah knew she was about to die.
She thought of her daughter, of Earth, of all the things she would never see again.
The warrior's shot never came.
Instead, the creature suddenly stiffened, its head tilting as if listening to something only it could hear. Around the command center, the other Zephyrians stopped their advance as well. They stood motionless for several seconds, and then, as one, they began to retreat.
"What the hell?" Lieutenant Rodriguez called out from behind an overturned table.
The Zephyrians were pulling back, moving with urgent purpose toward the breached door. Within moments, the command center was empty except for the surviving humans.
Admiral Webb cautiously stood up from behind his position. "Thompson, what's happening on the sensors?" Thompson's hands flew over his controls, his face pale in the emergency lighting.
"Sir, the unknown contact is still approaching, but..."
"Admiral, the Zephyrian bioships are powering up their engines. They're preparing to leave orbit." "Leave?" Sarah couldn't believe it. They were winning. Why would they leave now?
Her answer came from Thompson's sensor display. The massive unknown contact was no longer at the edge of their detection range. It was close now, close enough for detailed scans. "Sir," Thompson whispered, "I'm reading energy signatures unlike anything in our databases.
This ship, it's not just big. It's ancient. Really ancient. And it's definitely not from around here."
Through the shattered windows of the command center, Sarah could see the Zephyrian bioships rising rapidly through the atmosphere. They were fleeing, abandoning their conquest in the face of something that terrified them more than any human resistance ever could. High above, beyond the reach of sensors and sight, something vast and impossibly old moved through the void between stars. Something that had been sleeping for millions of years, awakened by the psychic screams of the dying and the desperate courage of those who refused to surrender. The Zephyrians knew what was coming. They had faced it before, in the dark spaces between galaxies, and they remembered the price of standing against it. Humanity was about to meet its first true ally in the cosmos. And that ally was very, very angry. The first sign was the silence. Commander Saracen stood in the ruined command center of Fort Meridian, watching through the shattered windows as the last of the Zephyrian bioships fled into orbit. The alien song that had tormented them for hours had cut off abruptly, replaced by an eerie quiet that seemed to press against her eardrums. "Admiral," Communications Officer Thompson called out, his voice tight with amazement. "Sir, you need to see this." Admiral Webb moved to Thompson's station, stepping carefully around the debris and bodies that littered the command center. The main sensor display showed the approaching unknown contact, now close enough for detailed analysis. The ship was enormous, easily 10 kilometers in length and carved from what appeared to be a single piece of dark metal that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. Its design was unlike anything in human records, angular and predatory, with flowing lines that suggested both advanced engineering and organic growth. Weapons ports dotted its hull like the eyes of some cosmic beast. "Energy readings are off the charts," Thompson reported. "Sir, this thing is putting out more power than our entire fleet combined." "What about communications?" Webb asked. "Any attempt to contact us?" "Nothing, sir. Radio silence across all frequencies." Sarah moved closer to the display, studying the alien vessel. Something about its design seemed familiar, as if she'd seen it in dreams or half-remembered nightmares. Thompson ran a deep scan on the hull composition. "I want to know how old that thing is." As Thompson's hands flew over his controls, the ground beneath their feet began to vibrate. Not the sharp impacts of weapon fire they'd grown accustomed to, but a deep, rhythmic thrumming that seemed to emanate from the very air around them. "Ma'am," Thompson's voice was barely above a whisper. "The preliminary analysis shows this can't be right." "What is it?" Sarah demanded. "According to the isotope decay patterns, that ship is approximately 400 million years old." The command center fell silent except for the growing vibration in the air. 400 million years. Humanity had only existed for a few 100,000 years. When this ship was new, Earth was a barren rock covered in primitive oceans. "Sir," Rodriguez called out from the tactical station. "The Zephyrian fleet is accelerating out of the system. All bioships are running at maximum burn." Admiral Webb frowned. "Running from what? That ship isn't even in weapons range yet." His answer came from above. The thrumming grew louder, deeper, until it became a sound that was felt rather than heard. Through the broken windows, the sky began to change. The clouds, already darkened by smoke and alien technology, started to swirl in massive patterns centered on empty space directly overhead. Then, the stars went out. One by one, the points of light in the visible sky simply vanished, as if something vast and dark was passing between them and the distant suns. The darkness spread outward from a central point, growing larger and larger until it covered nearly a quarter of the sky above them. "Thompson," Admiral Webb said quietly, "please tell me that's not what I think it is." Thompson's hands were shaking as he adjusted the sensors. "Sir, I'm reading a massive gravity distortion directly above us. Something is displacing spacetime itself." The darkness in the sky began to take shape. What they had mistaken for empty space was actually the underside of something so large that their minds struggled to comprehend it. As it descended through the upper atmosphere, details became visible: weapon batteries the size of city blocks, sensor arrays that dwarfed the largest human space stations, armor plating that could have served as continents. This wasn't just a ship. It was a Titan. "My God," Sarah breathed. "How big is that thing?" Thompson's voice was barely audible. "Current readings suggest approximately 200 kilometers in length. Maybe more. The sensors can't get a complete scan." 200 kilometers. Sarah's mind reeled. The largest human battleship was barely 3 kilometers long.
This thing could carry their entire fleet in its cargo bays.
As the massive vessel continued its descent, the air around Fort Meridian began to change. The smoke and ash from the battle was being pushed away by some invisible force, and, for the first time in days, Sarah could see blue sky at the edges of the Titan's shadow.
"Sir," Rodriguez reported, "I'm picking up massive energy buildups along the ship's hull. Those weapon batteries are powering up." "Targeting what?" Webb demanded.
Rodriguez checked his displays, then looked up with an expression of wonder and terror.
"Everything, sir. Every Zephyrian bioship in the system."
High above, in the vacuum of space, the fleeing Zephyrian fleet suddenly found itself facing something that made their worst nightmares seem like pleasant dreams. The Titan-class vessel had weapons systems that violated every known law of physics. Energy beams that could crack planets, gravitational lances that could tear apart entire fleets, and defensive systems that made their bioship's armor seem like tissue paper.
The Zephyrian fleet tried to fight.
Their bioships unleashed every weapon in their arsenal, firing concentrated streams of bioplasma and launching clouds of attack craft. The combined firepower would have been enough to sterilize a dozen worlds.
It barely scratched the Titan's paint.
In response, the ancient vessel opened fire.
The weapons didn't produce visible beams or projectiles.
Instead, space itself seemed to twist and fold around the Zephyrian ships. One moment the bioships were there, the next they simply weren't. Not destroyed, not vaporized, simply removed from existence as if they had never been there at all.
"Dear sweet Jesus," Admiral Webb whispered. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds.
When it was over, the Zephyrian fleet, hundreds of bioships that had terrorized human space for months, was gone. Not a trace remained. The Titan began to descend further, settling into a stable orbit just above the upper atmosphere. As it moved, Sarah could see that its hull wasn't entirely solid. There were sections that seemed to flow like liquid metal, others that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and still others that appeared to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously.
"Thompson," she said, her voice hoarse with awe, "any communication from our rescuer?" "Nothing yet, ma'am." "But..." Thompson paused, adjusting his equipment. "I am picking up some kind of scanning beam. Very sophisticated. It's reading our DNA." "What?" "Not just ours specifically, ma'am. It's scanning every living thing on the planet. Every human, every plant, every microbe. Like it's cataloging our entire biosphere." The scanning continued for several minutes. Then, without warning, the Titan's communication systems came online. The signal wasn't transmitted through radio waves or laser bursts.
Instead, it seemed to appear directly in their minds, bypassing their ears entirely. The voice that spoke was ancient beyond measure, carrying the weight of eons and the wisdom of civilizations that had risen and fallen before Earth's sun was born. When it spoke, it used perfect English, though somehow Sarah knew it could have communicated in any language, any form of expression that would convey meaning. "Children of Earth," the voice said, and in those 3 words Sarah heard compassion, strength, and a terrible sadness for all the universe's lost innocence. "We are the architects. We have slept long and dreamed deep, but your courage in the face of the swarm has awakened us." Admiral Webb stepped forward, though he knew the gesture was meaningless when speaking to a ship 200 kilometers long. "This is Admiral Marcus Webb of the United Earth Defense Forces. We thank you for your intervention." "Your thanks are appreciated but unnecessary," the architect replied. "We do not act from kindness, but from recognition. You have shown that rarest of qualities, the willingness to fight impossible odds for those who cannot fight for themselves. This marks you as worthy inheritors." "Inheritors of what?" Sarah found herself asking. "Of the galaxy, young human. The Zephyrian swarm has consumed 17 civilizations in this spiral arm alone. You are the first to face them with true courage rather than mere desperation. You are the first to awaken us." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. 17 civilizations. How many billions, trillions, of lives had been lost to the swarm? "What happens now?" Admiral Webb asked. "Now, you learn.
Now, you grow. Now, you take your place among the stars as guardians rather than victims. But, first, the Titan's weapons systems powered up once more, but this time they weren't targeting enemy ships. Instead, they fired at empty space throughout the system, space that suddenly revealed hidden Zephyrian vessels and monitoring stations that had been cloaked from human sensors. First, we ensure that every trace of the swarm is removed from your space. Sarah watched in amazement as dozens of hidden Zephyrian installations simply ceased to exist. The architect's technology was beyond anything she had imagined possible. When you are ready, the voice continued, we will teach you. We will show you wonders beyond your current understanding. But, know this, with great power comes great responsibility. You will become guardians of the innocent, protectors of those who cannot protect themselves. Are you prepared for such a burden? Admiral Webb looked around the ruined command center at his surviving officers and crew. These people had been willing to die to protect civilians they would never meet. They had fought impossible odds with courage rather than desperation. We are, he said simply. High above, the Titan pulsed with approval, and Sarah felt a warm presence in her mind, ancient, wise, and infinitely patient. The age of human expansion was over. The age of human guardianship was about to begin. 6 months after first contact with the architects, Commander Saracen stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Meridian Station, watching human ships practice maneuvers that would have been impossible with their old technology. The vessels moved through space like living things, their hulls shifting and adapting to changing conditions, powered by energy systems that drew directly from the quantum foam of spacetime itself. Everything had changed. The architect Titan still hung in orbit above Kepler 442b, though its presence no longer seemed alien and threatening. Instead, it felt protective, like a guardian watching over children as they took their first steps into a larger world. Sarah had spent weeks aboard the massive vessel, learning from beings so ancient that they remembered the birth of galaxies. Ma'am, Lieutenant Rodriguez approached, his uniform bearing new insignia that marked him as a member of the Guardian Corps, humanity's new role as protectors of civilizations threatened by the various menaces that prowled the galaxy. Admiral Webb requests your presence in the briefing room. We have a situation developing in the Rigel sector. Sarah nodded and followed Rodriguez through the corridors of the station. The walls were lined with holographic displays showing the current status of human space and the surrounding regions. Green indicators marked safe zones, yellow showed areas under Guardian protection, and red, there were thankfully few red zones left, but each one represented a civilization under threat. In the briefing room, Admiral Webb stood before a three-dimensional star map that showed the local galactic arm in stunning detail. The map was a gift from the architects, containing information about thousands of inhabited worlds that humanity had never suspected existed. Sarah, Webb said as she entered, we've received a distress call from the Altarian Republic. 3 systems, approximately 40 million inhabitants. They're under attack by something called the Devourers. Sarah studied the map, noting the location of the threatened systems. What do we know about the Devourers? According to the architect's database, they're a machine civilization that converts organic matter into computational matrix. Think of them as cosmic locusts with artificial intelligence. They strip mine entire worlds, not just for resources, but for the biological data contained in every living cell. The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders like a familiar cloak. 6 months ago, she had been a simple military officer concerned only with protecting human colonies. Now she was a guardian, charged with protecting any civilization that couldn't protect itself. What's our response capability? She asked. We have the Titan-class vessel Prometheus ready for deployment, Webb replied. Full Guardian crew complement, supported by 6 architect-upgraded destroyers. Sarah felt a moment of amazement at how casually they spoke of deploying ships that rivaled the architect Titan in capability. Human technology had advanced centuries in mere months, guided by teachers who had mastered the sciences when Earth was still a molten ball of rock. Time to intercept? 18 hours at maximum burn. Then, we'd better get moving. How many Guardian ships do we have in that sector? None. We'll be the first responders. Sarah nodded grimly. This was the new reality of human existence. No longer could they focus solely on their own survival and expansion. They were now part of something larger, part of an ancient responsibility to protect life wherever it flourished. As she prepared to leave for the mission briefing, Admiral Webb placed a hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, there's something else. The architects want to speak with you privately before you depart." "About the mission?" "About something bigger." An hour later, Sarah found herself in the Architect Titan's central chamber, a vast space that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The architect she had come to know as the first speaker manifested before her as a shifting pattern of light and energy that her mind interpreted as roughly humanoid. "Young Guardian," the first speaker said, its mental voice carrying the weight of eons, "you have adapted well to your new role. But we must speak of darker things." "I'm listening." The Zephyrian swarm was not the greatest threat facing this galaxy. It was merely one of many symptoms of a larger problem. There are forces moving in the deep void, ancient enemies that we once fought to a standstill. They are beginning to stir again. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of enemies? Entities that predate even us. Beings that view the very existence of life as an affront to the natural order of the universe. They seek not conquest, but extinction, the complete elimination of all consciousness, all growth, all hope. The first speaker paused, and Sarah could sense its ancient sadness. "We fought them once, millennia ago, when the galaxy was young. The war lasted for 10 million years and reduced countless civilizations to cosmic dust. In the end, we achieved not victory but stalemate. They retreated to the spaces between galaxies, and we slept, hoping that our time would not come again. But it has," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. Our sensors detect movement in the void. They are returning, and, when they do, the galaxy will face a threat that makes the Zephyrian swarm seem like a minor inconvenience." Sarah thought of Earth, of her daughter Emily, who was now training to be a guardian herself, of all the civilizations humanity had committed to protecting. "How long do we have?" "Perhaps a century. Perhaps less. Time moves differently for beings such as they." "And you want us to help fight them?" "We want you to lead the fight," the first speaker corrected. "We architects are ancient and tired. We have seen too much, lost too much. Our time is ending. But humanity is young and strong and filled with the kind of fierce hope that once drove us to greatness." The implications staggered her. "You're asking us to take responsibility for the entire galaxy." "We are asking you to become what we once were, guardians not just of individual worlds, but of life itself. The other races we guide are strong and brave, but none have shown the same combination of courage, adaptability, and pure stubborn refusal to surrender that we have seen in humanity." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the magnitude of what was being asked. Finally, she spoke. "The Altarian situation, is this a test?" "Every situation you face is a test. The Devourers are real, and the Altarians will die without intervention. But, yes, we watch how you handle each crisis, how you grow into your new role." "And if we fail?" "Then, the galaxy falls into darkness, and consciousness ends forever." The first speaker's tone carried no judgment, only vast sadness. "But we do not believe you will fail. You fought the swarm when all hope was gone. You stood against impossible odds because it was right, not because it was possible. That is the mark of true guardians." Sarah straightened, feeling the weight of countless worlds settling on her shoulders. "Then, we'd better not disappoint you." "You have already exceeded our greatest hopes," the first speaker replied. "Now go. Save the Altarians. Save them all." 2 hours later, the Guardian Corps vessel Prometheus departed Kepler 442b, bound for the Rigel sector and humanity's first major test as galactic protectors. Aboard the massive ship, Sarah stood on the bridge watching the stars blur past as they jumped through dimensional space. Captain Torres, the Prometheus's commanding officer, approached her. "Ma'am, we'll reach the Altarian system in 16 hours. What are your orders?"
Sarah looked out at the streaming stars, thinking of the architect's words about ancient enemies and the responsibility of protecting all life. Then, she thought of the human trait that had impressed the architects most, the refusal to surrender in the face of impossible odds. "We do what humans do best, Captain," she said. "We save everyone we can, and, then, we prepare for whatever comes next." The ship jumped again, carrying humanity's newest guardians toward their destiny. Behind them, the architect Titan watched benevolently, its ancient crew feeling something they hadn't experienced in millions of years: hope for the future. In the deep void between galaxies, ancient enemies stirred and began their slow journey toward a galaxy they intended to cleanse of all life. But they would find it defended by a species that had learned courage in Earth's gravity well and had been taught wisdom by the oldest civilization in the galaxy. Humanity had found its true purpose among the stars. Not as conquerors or explorers, but as guardians of everything precious and fragile in a universe that was often dark and hostile. The age of human expansion was over. The age of human guardianship had begun. And, in that beginning lay the hope of every living thing in the galaxy.